on certain ideas and symbols now. It's different than what it used to be, but it's essentially the same thing that's been practiced probably for eons in one way, if you look at it from a certain perspective.
And those symbols can change.
Right.
Look at the validity that people will put to a donut, in the shape of the Virgin Mary. That symbol is probably as moving spiritually to some people who believe in that, and I'm not saying that it's right or wrong to believe in that. I'm just observing it as a folklore researcher.
Yeah.
That symbol holds as much power as say letters over a door that may protect a house against witches, or the Christian door, any of the crosses that you find on the doors. And in fact, most houses in Atlantic Canada have what we'd call today a Christian door.
Yeah, yeah. Or, if you're a New Ager and you want to protect your house or your property or yourself from bad energies,
Or look at crystals, look at various things that people buy now. I'm old enough to remember when we first started to get interested, and North Americans first started to get interested in the belief systems and the iconography from the Indian subcontinent. Now those are relatively common items. If you walk through the streets of Halifax, you can identify a lot of the houses that have a Buddhist living in them by the prayer flags outside the door.
Yeah, there's some in my backyard, actually.
Well, exactly. So if people are comfortable with the symbolism that identifies their belief system, then they can produce it publicly. If it is still something like witchcraft that either upsets or some people find it abhorrent, then you are less public with that aspect of it.
Yeah.
Even practicing Wiccans who are mistakenly considered anti-Christian. Well, a Wiccan can't be anti-Christian because a Wiccan does not believe in a god or a devil or this sort of stuff. They believe in other aspects of supremacy in the natural world. So it's interesting that you would look at that and people would denigrate contemporary Wiccanism when they really don't understand it. And I'm sure a lot of times that happened with witchcraft, is that people sometimes were so afraid of it that and their religion allowed them to be very much against it. There's a very interesting story of a man called Siamerture, who was an Acadian sorcerer, and it was said that he was actually taken to the church and exorcised, but that's the only oral history. There is no documentation in the church of an exorcism against this man who was known to practice witchcraft.
Wow, that's very interesting. Not to make light here, but I've got this sign on the front of my house, and it says, "No flyers, please." And this guy keeps throwing these newspapers on my lawn. I'm thinking maybe I should put some Rowan Tree branches in the shape of crosses all around my property to keep this guy away from me.
Do you think it would work?
Maybe. It's worth a shot. This guy's driving me crazy.
But you have to see, a lot of times, witchcraft is, at least the historical aspect of witchcraft that I've discovered, not always, but very often, you have to believe in the power of this to work as well.
Right.
How many people have walked by a rowan tree or even a cow horn hanging in the woods from a tree and thought nothing of it? But if you know what that symbolism means, that it's supposed to ward you off, if a broom handle is laid on the door sill, would you be afraid to walk over it? Perhaps not, if you didn't know the belief that would identify you as a witch.
Yeah, true. Yeah, I see where you're going with this. Very interesting. I'm very grounded in science. I grew up. I'm very skeptical, but I read into a lot of physics and quantum physics, and I understand now by reading a lot of different papers and listening to a lot of lecturers and scientists that there's a lot more going on beyond the human eye, that we know of, and there are a lot of energies taking place and exchanging with one another and interfacing, and the idea quantumly that you can affect the flow of that energy positively or negatively with just pure intention, not only action, is a really interesting principle. So yeah, I'm a believer in quote-unquote magic, based on scientific terms. I think that, throughout history, people had a different view of it, obviously, because they didn't have the intellect or the know-how that we have now and in understanding energy
I wouldn't
transmissions.
say they didn't have the intellect.
Okay, maybe the scientific lingo and
But that's this year's science.
Right. Well, you see,
Darwin's science was not our science.
No, that's true. I guess what I'm trying to say is it's more concrete because of the math and the emphasis we put on the science now.
Or else people, how many scientists have you heard interviewed who say, well, yes, I am a practicing Christian, or I am a practicing Jew, or I am a practicing Muslim, and then they allow their belief system to be a part of their life, and that's a legitimate part of their life. They can reconcile the two, belief, faith, and science. Witchcraft is the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
I'm sure, when we look at this, it's like any other aspect of folklore. Not everybody in the maritime provinces sat around singing folk songs. Not every Newfoundlander knew, Jack was every inch a sailor or eyes to buy.
Right.
When you read them in folk collections, when you read Helen Creighton's Blue Nose Ghost, you would assume that everybody in the Maritimes sat around in the evening and told ghost stories. When you read my book, you should not assume that everybody believed in witchcraft. What you're finding in books like mine and books like Helen Creighton's are collections from people who were willing to share that. In many cases, there's people among us who are not willing to share. I've talked to several people who said, well, I know things, but I won't talk to you, or I don't want to tell you that. In other cases, only after I brought out this book did stories come forward. People say, oh, you should have talked to me. Well, you didn't offer to talk to me when I was asking.
Yeah.
But sometimes people are very reluctant to share their beliefs.
Yeah, definitely. I can understand that. And a lot of these, I don't know, I just get the impression that there's a lot more magic taking place now. It's almost like there's a resurgence of magic taking place now, but it's just dressed so differently. And I think it has a lot more grounding because of, a lot of the science books and textbooks kind of coming out, validating its existence in scientific grounding.
When you look at natural medicines, of course, herbal medicines or just medicines that were used in North America, especially pre-contact by the First Nations people, we're only beginning to scratch the surface of that. And belief systems are very much the same way. Are there powers? I have no idea. People always ask me all the time, do you believe in the supernatural? Do you believe in witchcraft? I believe. I neither believe nor disbelieve. Like you, I'm one of those people that if I can hold it in my hand, I'll say that it's real. But on the other hand, just because I haven't experienced it doesn't mean that it isn't there. Maybe I don't have the capacity to experience it. Maybe it's because I don't search for it. I'm not interested in going and exploring it and trying to investigate it only purely from a scholarly point of view. But however, I have talked with people and looked into their eyes who told me stories of the supernatural and told me stories of witchcraft that I couldn't look at them and say, that's bunk.
Yeah.
Because they come with such a strong conviction. Are they right? I don't know. Am I right in not allowing that to come forward a little bit stronger in my personality? I don't know. I'm not a faith-based driven person.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I don't want you to get the wrong idea from me either, right? Because I always try and keep a door open because we don't have all the answers. That reminds me of something. There's a dialogue that I sometimes have. I just had recently with, I think, my girlfriend there over the last little while. When we were talking about, actually, I think it was because I brought your book up and you were coming on the program, and we thought, we were talking and we said, what's interesting, all of the thousands of witches that were burned and killed, not only the witches, but a lot of the indigenous cultures that were slaughtered and just all of the oral history and stories that they had passed on for centuries about natural medicines and magic was lost in a lot of these people. And we always wonder just exactly where we would be in the world right now if a lot of those secrets were still kept open at the surface.
I used to think that same way. And I agree with you to a certain extent that some aspects are lost. But over the years, by dealing with studies of various cultures, I've discovered that when a culture is denigrated and abused, so much goes underground, and it is going to take decades for that stuff to surface. I used to think that when I first started to study Mi'kmaq folklore and culture in the early 1970s, and I would go and talk to Mi'kmaq people, and they say, "Oh, we don't know anything about that. We don't know anything about that." They were just reluctant to talk to me. Who was I? Another white guy coming and asking questions. So much of that stuff is still within the community. So much of that stuff is if you went to the rainforest of the Amazon, if you went to Acadian households where somebody maybe still practiced folk medicine, and even in my own household, I can remember a time when my uncles came and knocked on the door. We were living in the country, and they got my father, and they drove probably about 40 kilometers away to get a particular root to boil down to cure my cousin of some aspect of colic.
Yeah.
Now, we had a hospital and a doctor in the town, but they went out of the way to get this because they felt that would be the surer medicine. Today, would you do that? And if you did it, would you publicly say, "Oh, I use this instead of going to the doctor," because there may be ramifications from the community. There may be people saying, "Well, that's not the method you should use," or something. A lot of times when things are denigrated, then they go underground.
Yeah.
And I think we have so much that's gone underground that's just starting to percolate and starting to come up, and rightly so. For instance, an example is with the Mi'kmaq community. Rightly so, then that needs to be brought forward only by the Mi'kmaq community when they feel it is safe to bring it forward again.
Yeah, I was just listening to a radio program where one of a member of an indigenous culture, I think it was the Cherokee, he was talking about speaking to elders, and the elder had told him, recounted a story to him that he thought was lost, but he said, no, it's always been here.
Yes.
We just didn't want to share it. You know what else, Clary, is more often than not, I'm going to be honest with you, my girlfriend is a huge part of this, in my life, but more often than not, I'll seek out natural remedy before I go see a doctor now, and I never used to be that way. I was the other way around. So I see what you're saying about this resurgence, and it's very important, I think, in my opinion.
Well, now we're calling it something else, though.
Yeah.
We're calling it homeopathy,
right?
or things like that. So we're reinvestigating other aspects where before when people would talk about if you just look at one of the simple folk cures that my mother had used on her when she was a girl. She had a fever, and they took salt fish, and they tied it around her neck. And it sounds bizarre, but if you think that a salt will draw the blood closer to the skin, if you can lower the temperature by bringing the blood closer to the skin and therefore cooling it off, even by 1 degree, it may mean the difference between a child being sick and really sick.
Yeah, true enough. Wow, yeah.
You look at those folk remedies, and a lot of times you think, well, did they really have any validity? My great-grandmother was a great practitioner of folk medicine, but yet she still used aspirin and Dodd's kidney pills and miner's liniment.
Right. Yeah. You know what? When I was younger, my mother, every time I'd get a headache, well, look, I come from a line of Hungarian gypsies on my mother's side, so we're no stranger to the strange or eccentric. She used to, instead of giving us aspirin, she used to swear against it. She used to take like a cold steel blade and kind of run it on our forehead. Mm-hmm. And somehow, I don't know if it was the cooling of the blade or whatever, it might have been just psychological, but I mean, that was one way for us to kind of soothe our headaches instead of using aspirin, right? I mean,
that's a form of sympathetic magic.
I think so. Yeah.
Of using the blade to slice the pain away.
Well, yeah, but it wasn't the sharp part on our head. It was just
but still, the act of using a blade.
Yeah.
Holding it in your hand and using it in a ritual.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, and you know what? When I use natural remedies now for ails, I find that I feel a lot better. I mean, I used to get weird, aftermaths of using pharmaceuticals or even aspirins or things. When you go the natural route, in my opinion, I think it's the wise choice.
It's not necessarily the particular drug in a pharmaceutical that is the harmful aspect of it. It is the coagulants and all the other things that they use to hold these stuff together that you're